that I'm not in here to teach y'all anything because I feel like this is the classroom full of teachers. And so, how do you teach the teachers? There's so much Bible knowledge and Bible wisdom. And somebody spread some wisdom on me already this morning because, on most days, people who know me, I love to drink coffee, and I drink coffee all the time, and I do so without spilling it on myself or anything else. But if you notice, I don't know how I have a coffee stain right here, and I did that right before we got to church this morning. And it would happen on the day that I got to stand before you. And it's warm in here, so I had to take my jacket off. So y'all are just going to have to live with this stain on my shirt. Try not to let that be the focus of your attention. But Brother Walter was in the restroom with me, and I'm telling you, somebody was talking about the other day, you can get wisdom in the men's room, okay? And he reminded me that back in the day that people would have an extra shirt in their car just in case they spill coffee on their shirt. And maybe Ashley will have me start doing that. So because if I'm going to spill coffee on me, it's going to be when I got to stand in front of everybody. But thank y'all again for letting me come in here. And I just want to kind of share my thoughts on this subject more than try to teach a lesson so much. But our text today, and we're going to get into this text shortly, is going to be Joshua chapter 4. That's where most of our study will come from. And really this story begins in Joshua chapter 3, but we're going to use Joshua chapter 4 as our main text. But was it last week or week before last? We were given our new theme for 2025, becoming or trying to be have our lives lived like living stones for God. And here we are. We're 2 or 3 weeks into this year, and I kind of was trying to figure out, what does that mean to me? What does it mean to be a living stone? Because, obviously there's nothing about a stone that is alive. It's not an organism or anything. So what does it mean to Jason White to be a living stone? And so when Justin asked me to prepare for this class, that really gave me an opportunity to think about that and kind of to reflect on that. And so just to open up things today, before we get into our text, I want to talk a little bit about living stones, and this means 4 different things to me. These were the 4 things that kept coming back to me when I was thinking to myself, what is a living stone? What does it mean to be a living stone for God? So number 1, I think if you're going to be a living stone, if you're going to be like a stone, you need to have a distinct identity. Okay, and let me stop here too. Anytime during this, again, this is not supposed to be a lecture. If there's raise your hand or just say, if you got a comment, please do, because these classes always go better when everybody participates. But number 1, I think if you're going to be a living stone, you need to have a distinct identity. So in other words, if you're on a hike or if you go on a walk or whatever, and you have a stone in your path, well, you've got a choice. You can go around this stone. You can go over this stone. You can stop and take a break and sit on the stone, whatever it is. But you know that is a stone. It's not to be mistaken with a tree. It's not to be mistaken with an animal or something like that. A stone is a stone. And what that means to us is if we're living our lives as living stones, then we're going to have a distinct identity. People are going to be able to see us and be around us, and they're going to know right away, that's a Christian. He's a Christian. She's a Christian because of the way we live our lives. So that's number 1. But also, if I'm going to be a living stone for God, then that means to me that I have to have an unmovable faith. Okay, you probably have been, maybe some of y'all have been out west to the Grand Canyon or some of these huge mountain ranges or whatever, but you've seen pictures at least of these huge stones that have been sitting in the exact same place for thousands of years, if not even since the creation or since the flood or whatever, but they've been sitting there for thousands of years, and no matter what, the wind, the water, the whatever, nothing has been able to move these stones. They're sitting there, and they'll be sitting there unless the end of the world comes probably thousands of years from now. And we need to be like those stones when it comes to our faith. We can't be easily moved. We should be unmovable. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 58 reads like this. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. So my point here is, if we're living our lives as living stones, our faith is immovable, We put that faith to work, which is what this is all about, is becoming living stones, going to work for God. We put that faith into action, then we can rest assured that whatever our work is, and you may not get the greatest results, you may get small results, you may get huge results when you go to work for God, but it's not going to be in vain. He is going to take whatever you do, and he's going to make great things happen with it. So that's number 2. And then, which I think this is a very important one, especially to me. I don't know why I put it as the 3rd one, but I think that if you are living your life as a living stone, then that says that you're standing on a firm foundation, right? We all know the parable of the wise builder and the foolish builder. We've all sang the song. We've all done vacation Bible school skits on it. We've known it since we were children. And it's found in Matthew chapter 7, verses 24 through 27. And it teaches us that the foolish man built his house on the what? Sand, right? And when life beat against it, when the storms and the trials and tribulations of life beat against it, his house did what? It fell, okay, because it didn't have a good foundation. But the wise man built his house upon the what? And for our class, it's going to be the stone, okay? He built it on a firm foundation. And when life beat against it, when trials and tribulations came against it, his house stood firm, right? So I feel like that what this parable teaches us, what this song that we've sang since we were children teaches us, is that if we're living our lives as living stones for God, then we're going to be founded on a firm foundation. And that's important when it comes to our families. It's important when it comes to our co-workers and friends, the people we are engaged with every day, and also for our church family. We need to know that when we come together in like mind, that we're all standing on the same firm foundation, like the wise man built his house on. And then finally, for me, what it means to be living a life as a living stone for God, I want to be a stone that, if you found me, if I was a stone, I would be in a bridge somewhere, stuck in a bridge, and not in a wall. And for thousands of years, people, ancient civilizations, they built their bridges and things out of stone, and they built buildings out of stone. They stacked them on top of each other. And Terry has said in his sermons and in our Sunday school class, maybe y'all have used this example in your classes too, that we want to be in the business of building bridges, not building walls between people. And when I think, how is a bridge alive? Well, when I think about a bridge, I think about something that is in place, but there is stuff going on. There are things passing over. It serves a purpose. People are able to go from one place to the other. It connects two places together. That's what a bridge does. That's what makes it a living stone versus a wall. Now, yes, a wall serves a purpose. It's stacked up. These stones are stacked up into this wall, and this wall keeps things out or keeps things in, depending on which side of the wall you're on. But other than that, they just kind of stand there, right? It's not like this bridge where there's motion, there's things happening, work's getting done, things are getting done, connections are being made. So if I'm going to be a living stone for God, I want to be that kind of stone, one that's in the bridge making business, so that I can bring the good news that we all know to the world who doesn't know it, okay? So with that was a real brief description of what living stone means to me. What about you guys? I'll take a few, if somebody wants to share briefly what their idea of being a living stone. Yes, ma'am.
The Romans, when they built their bridges and waterways and stuff, they made an arch.
Yep.
In the center.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what held that arch together was the keystone.
Right.
And Christ is our keystone.
Okay.
That helps hold us together.
Great. Thank you. That's right. Exactly. Without that stone, the whole arch doesn't work. What else? Surely y'all have had time to think of it. You can share with what does being a living stone mean to you? Anybody?
Living implies that it's also growing, even though it's solid. Living means growing. It's not just stagnant.
Okay. When Justin called me and we talked about this for a little while over the phone, I think it was like Sunday or Monday about me doing this. You know, his idea about this class, and it was Joshua chapter 4 was actually his idea, and I kind of. He said, "Why don't you take it and run with it?" So, but the whole idea here is being a living stone is that, and what what the elders are wanting us to do is we want to be doing work this year. We want to grow the kingdom. And like Johnny's saying, if you're a dead stone, you're really not doing anything. Okay, yeah, you're here, people see you, but we want people to get engaged. We want to be living stones and get out there and do some work. So thank you, Johnny. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I think, when I think of stone, it's something that's sturdy, something that can be either you hide it behind it, you stand on top of it. And when I think about it, it's like being a living stone for someone else.
Okay.
You know, that let me be the person that you can come to.
Okay.
And whether it's for encouragement or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, that would be like a living stone.
Good. And see, coming from you, that makes me feel better because that's one of my ideas. I feel like you've got to be a firm foundation, you know, and that's why it allows people to come to you because they know, hey, at least they seem to have it figured out. They know God. So anybody else? Yes, sir.
When I think about a stone, and what we're talking about today, I think about the chief cornerstone, the foundation, and what you just said, and what's been mentioned already about how we want to build our foundation. And we're not just talking about a building, a house.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about a spiritual realm, a foundation that can change the world. That the only foundation, the only salvation is in the Lord Jesus Christ. And all of our building blocks, all of them, should think about that first and foremost. And every move we make, every time we try to turn somebody on to Jesus, we think about his words and what his apostles taught us. And we won't be building our house on sand.
Okay.
And the sand, see, moves.
That's right.
I think about all these people that have beach houses. Hey, if you got one, that's great. But know this, there's coming a time when the storm's going to hit. Just like West Dolphin Island, it's going to happen. But we have the foundation that will never, nothing take it away. And that's what we got to do.
That's right. Exactly. I think that's a good point. All right. I'm going to move to page number 2 because, like I told y'all, I've timed myself and I've got about 39 minutes worth of notes. So we got a little bit of reading to do, and we're going to try to get through all this. So, okay. So the way my mind works, as soon as I heard them say living stones, well, I said, okay, living stones. Well, my mind went straight to, well, does that mean there are dead stones? Are there dead stones out there? And it sounds kind of silly at first because obviously there's not a single stone that I know of that's made out of any organic matter. It's all dead. There's nothing living about it if you're talking literally. But anyway, that's kind of the way my mind went. So I'm going to spend a second, and I think this is important to get to before we get into the text where I'm wanting to go with this. So just play along with me here. Let's just talk about a living stone, if you will, for a moment. So especially pertaining to our text, in my mind, if the only way really a stone can come alive is if it's put in motion or is used for a job. But for our purposes, what about if it's used to make a monument or a memorial? Okay, well, you take something that, I don't know, there's all kind of stones, and I'm not a geologist, but limestone, sandstone, whatever stone, X stone, may have been laying there for thousands of years and it has no purpose, but suddenly that stone has a purpose. And for this case, maybe it gets used to build a monument. And Merriam-Webster defines a monument as being something that serves as a memorial. It's lasting evidence of some person, place, or event, or maybe it's something to help you remember a distinguished person. And so right off the top of my mind, I mean, there are thousands of monuments throughout the world, but some that we may know a little bit more about, and I've never actually got to see any of these myself. But for instance, Mount Rushmore. This is a huge stone carving that man did, and it's got the images, the likeness of 4 presidents, 4 founding fathers of our country. And they're carved there to serve as a memorial, to help us to always remember, the founding of our country, the birth of our country, and the job that these four men played in doing so. So it gives that stone mountain life, right? It helps us to remember. The Washington Monument, this big, tall, towering, white monument that's located in the middle of Washington, D.C., helps us to remember President Washington, the father of our country. It's made out of stones that have no other purpose until they were made into this monument to help us to remember him. What about the war memorials that you see in Washington? These are, I believe they're made out of granite, and I think they go all the way back to maybe starting in World War I and all the way up to the present. And you can go there right now and visit that, and you can see all the names of the men and women who died in our country's wars defending our country. And although these people have passed on, because someone put their name on this wall, and family members or just visitors can go and see that what they'd sacrificed doesn't die with them. It goes on, it lives. So now this stone is brought to life. It is living stone. And then finally, I got to thinking, even a tombstone is alive, right? Because it tells you so much about the person that passed on and that tombstone represents. And this is kind of a weird thing about me, and Ashley knows this. I like to go and visit old cemeteries. I don't know if there's anybody else in here like that, but man, if I can find an old cemetery, there's some in Alabama that I've been to that, they're just about, you can barely read the inscription on the tombstones. I even found out that one of my relatives, I think it was my great-grandfather, one of the things he did was he decorated tombstones for a living. He used marbles and stones and stuff like that. So I don't know what that says about me, but the last time I got to visit one of these old cemeteries was in Savannah, Georgia. Such an old city, and they have this huge cemetery there, and there are some pretty famous people buried there, but to me, what's really cool is that some of the old tombstones that go back over 200 years, and you can read them. But what a tombstone, why is it alive? Because it represents someone who's passed on. But, there's no reason for me to know anybody that passed away in Savannah, but I can walk up there, and within just a minute, I know their whole name. I know when they were born. I know the day they died. You may even be able to know what religious beliefs they had. A lot of them will even tell you who their spouse was or how many children they had, maybe their children's names. And it's not uncommon today for people to even put something to do with their occupation on their tombstone, or maybe a hobby or something like that. My point being that yes, this person has passed on, but the tombstone is alive because it help us to remember that person, and you can know a lot about them. So those are examples of living stones. So what is a dead stone? I'm not going to harp on this too much, but to me, a dead stone is maybe these stone places that and I'm going to give you a couple examples where, yes, there are stones there. Yes, you can go and take a picture with them, or maybe you can touch them or whatever. And at some point in time, these stones meant something to somebody. They meant something to a civilization maybe, but that hasn't survived the test of times. And for instance, Stonehenge, that's probably the most common one that everybody knows. And there may be some people in here that actually visited Stonehenge. I haven't been able to do that. But I know there have been many articles written, many papers written. There have been PBS specials and National Geographic specials done on this. And there are a lot of theories out there of what these huge stone structures represent. Maybe who put them there and maybe when they were put there, but honestly, nobody knows the answers to all those questions. My point being is that, yes, at some point they meant something to somebody, but to us nowadays, they don't mean anything. They're essentially just something you can go and visit. They're dead stones. And then there's another location very similar to Stonehenge called Carahunge, and I probably said that wrong, but it's spelled Carahunge, and it's found in the country of Armenia. And it's actually a little bit larger than Stonehenge, and some people think it's even older than Stonehenge. But just like Stonehenge, nobody knows what it's there for. They don't really know who put it there or why they put it there. This is just another mound of dead stones, and there are examples of these all over the country, all over the world, really. So I guess what I hope you see here is that there are monuments that I think is a way of bringing a stone to life. It allows us to remember things. And then there are some stones that mean nothing at all to us other than just a really cool vacation destination. Anybody got anything to add to that?
The common denominator is that a living stone has a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
has a reason for existing,
Yep.
an active purpose. And it talks about some of the stones being rejected by the builders and then used as a cornerstone. Well, in construction back then, a cornerstone was kind of the stone that set the standard and held all the weight of the foundation.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what our purpose as a living stone is to be the foundation of the church.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about, but a cornerstone to me, what I've always thought, it's the starting point, right? Everything builds off of that, right? So, okay, yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
One thing, Joshua was a cornerstone. Bill, he the one cut the stones out and everything, but you got to know how to do it.
Yeah,
Just like, you got to have the right kind of machine to cut a stone.
that's right.
And, like you said, you got to go visit old cemetery. Us from my home, about 15 miles out of the mountain, there's a old French cemetery with all different types of generals and stuff like that on it. But when I go back home, I'll bring you a picture of it.
Okay, I appreciate that. I've wandered off even before me and Ashley were married. I'd go hunting and fishing or something. I'd find some old cemetery, and I'm like, I'd be walking around. It's kind of creepy, but I don't know. I enjoy finding. I saw tombstones where people were killed by Indians, and they actually put it on the tombstone. I think it's fun, but okay. Well, so let's go ahead and let's get into our text. It's going to be Joshua chapter 4. It's about 24 verses. I want us just to read the whole thing because I think I'm going to draw from basically the whole thing. Now, I will say this before we go into this, and y'all kind of keep up with this with me, and it doesn't really change the lesson or anything like that, but it's a little bit confusing when I first read it because it sounds like they built this memorial, this monument in the middle of the river, and then it sounds like, but they built it also on the Jericho side of the Jordan. So just keep that in mind. For the purposes of this lesson, I don't know the right answer there. I didn't really have time to ask somebody smarter than me. The memorial was built on the Jericho side of the Jordan River. So without any more discussion, let's go ahead and start reading. If somebody could read the first 6 verses of Joshua chapter 4, please. All right.
And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourselves 12 stones from here, out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you, and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, 1 man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask the time to come, saying, What do these stones mean to you?
Okay. Can somebody read, say, 7 through 13, please? Joshua chapter 4, verses 7 through, just start on verse 7. I'll stop you like at 13.
Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel forever. And the children of Israel did just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. So the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished, that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua, and the people hurried and crossed over. Then it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. And the men of Reuben, the men of Gad, the half tribe of Manasseh crossed over armed before the children of Israel. as Moses had spoken to them. About 40,000 prepared for war, crossed over before the Lord for battle to the plains of Jericho.
Okay. Can somebody pick up verse 14, maybe through verse 19?
On that day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him just as they had stood in awe of Moses all the days of his life. And the Lord said to Joshua, command the priests bearing the ark of the testimony to come up out of Jordan. How far?
Just go through like 19.
So Joshua commanded the priests, come up out of the Jordan. And when the priests bearing the ark of the covenant of the Lord came up from the midst of the Jordan, and the soles of the priests' feet were lifted up on dry ground, the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and overflowed all its banks as before.
Okay, and then maybe somebody take us from 19 on through the end of the chapter.
The people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month, and they encamped at Gilgal on the east border of Jericho. And those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. And he said to the people of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in times to come, what do these stones mean? Then you shall let your children know. Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. The Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, and that you may fear the Lord your God forever.
Okay, thank you all for reading that. I know it was a lot of reading, but I want to just get through that whole chapter. That's our text for today. And again, this kind of all starts over in chapter 3 of Joshua. This is where, if you go back and read that, it kind of repeats itself here in chapter 4. But this is where in chapter 3 God tells Joshua what he wants done and how he wants it done. And then in chapter 4, this is when it actually happens. And I want to give you all a little, whenever you start studying, this is why it's important to me to study, because I had forgotten that the children of Israel crossed 2 bodies of water. I always remember the Red Sea, but for some reason I had forgotten all about this. But when you start reading it, it's like, hey, I've heard this before. And I mean, I've done the Bible from cover to cover. It just goes to show you, though, how easy it is to pass right over stuff, and it didn't really stick with me. But I think it's really interesting when you start studying, you will pick up on stuff, and you'll be reminded of stuff like this. So this is actually the second time the children of Israel have to cross a body of water. So let's just jump right in here into our text. Some of the commentaries that I've read about people who studied this chapter and try to explain this chapter to us, they point out something that I think is definitely true. This crossing of the Jordan should have been and was probably one of the most important days in the history of the children of Israel, right? Because what was waiting for them on the other side of the Jordan? The promised land, okay? This was it. This was their big day. This is what 400 years of slavery and captivity with Egypt and 40 years of wandering through the wilderness. This is what they were waiting on. And let's not forget, in Numbers, I think it's chapter 14, God is telling them that no one over the age of 20, this is because of all their, you have the children of Israel where they were never happy for very long. They always messed up. But God was telling them that no one over the age of 20 was going to see the promised land, and only Caleb and Joshua would be there, right? So you got to think about that for a second. Most of these people who were standing at the shoreline of the Jordan River, they weren't even alive when they left Egypt. Or maybe if they were alive, they were certainly teenagers or younger, right? So God even told them that all their bodies would drop dead in the wilderness. It's kind of, me and Ashley were reading this, it's kind of, for God to say that, it's kind of eye-opening. So that's where they were. Some of these people may have been alive when the Red Sea was parted, but certainly most of them probably weren't. So here they are standing at the shores of the Jordan, and there's the promised land that they have been studying about and learning about their entire lives. And this was the gateway. This Jordan River was the gateway into the promised land for them. But the Jordan River, it was an obstacle for them. It was perhaps the last obstacle. And who knows, if you wander in the wilderness for 40 years, there's obviously going to be obstacles. I don't know what all lived in the wilderness where they were, but there were probably things that wanted to kill them, things that wanted to make them sick, things that wanted to harm them. They had been dealing with that for 40 years, and they had been able to meet these obstacles with the help of God. Well, here they are at this final obstacle, the River Jordan. And I did a little brief research into the Jordan River, and I'm going to give my wife credit here. When she listens to me rehearse these lessons and go over it, she's great about remembering things that I don't remember. But if you go back to Joshua chapter 3, verse 15, and it talks about that they're crossing the river during the growing season, or some versions may say the season of harvest or something like that. And what that means is at least from the sources I looked at, most days of the year, the Jordan River is not that hard to cross. It's like the Rio Grande. When I was a kid, I used to think the Rio Grande was huge, but apparently there are places where you can almost just walk across this river. And I think that the Jordan River is that way in some respects, in that it may be very shallow, and that in some places it may only be about 100 feet wide. But
Different seasons contribute to how deep it is or how shallow.
exactly. So, it makes sense that that these people that lived near this river would have their growing or seizing or whatever when the river was at its highest, because what happened is the tributaries that flow into this river would cause it to swell over its banks, and it would flood the land and make it's kind of a natural irrigation system for the land. So it stands to reason that they would use this time to do their growing and harvest and things like that. But if you're one of the children of Israel, that doesn't help you get across to the promised land, because some sources say that during this time, this river gets so deep and it can be up to a mile wide, and that this water is kind of rough if you were to get into it. So it really was a obstacle for them to get over into the promised land. And I don't know about you, but you know how the children of Israel are. You think any of them are like, great, here we are. 40 years of wandering, and here we get to the river. We can't even cross it. I mean, what are we going to do? Are we going to lay here? Some of them did that because we just know how they were. So there's that. But let me I want to ask you this question. Do you think that God, I know y'all know the answer here, but do you think that God could have had them cross the river somewhere at another place? Maybe took them upstream or downstream where it was only 100 feet wide and maybe knee deep, and you could maybe wade all your stuff across. You think God could have had them do that? Yeah. Do you think that God could have maybe delayed their arrival so that they got there after the growing season when the waters had kind of went back to their normal stage? Or maybe he could have got them there early before. You think he could have done that? Yeah. Absolutely he could have. Do you think that God could have had Moses and Joshua gather up 10,000 of their best construction workers, engineers, whatever they had back then, and could have spent ever how long it took to fashion some sort of bridge or structure that they could have crossed this river with? Absolutely he could have. But he didn't.
Dry land too.
Say again?
They walked through mud and went on dry land.
They went on dry land, absolutely. Well, I suggest to you that God chose this exact location at this exact time because he knew that without his help, they couldn't cross. He wanted them to know that he was God, that he was in charge, even of the rivers. He wanted to remind these people who was their Lord. So let's talk a little bit about this monument. I'm trying to keep track of my time. I don't want to go over everyone else's time, but let's talk a little about the monument that's made here, okay? So for our purposes, this monument represents living stones, right? Because we just talked about that a monument is living because it has a purpose. It reminds us of something. We put life is given to these stones because they help us to remember things. So I want you all to do me a favor. I want you to put on your imaginary caps for a little bit, okay? Just humor me here. And I'm going to do it with you. So imagine, if you will, that you are one of the children of Israel. You're not a priest. You're not a leader of any tribe. You're just Joe Schmuckatelli, the Israelite, okay? You're a person who has a job, or maybe you have some function in your camp or whatever, but for 40 years, or even longer maybe, you have been setting up camp, staying there forever how long, moving your camp, and then rinse and repeat. You're doing the same thing. You're eating manna and quail. And now listen, manna sounds pretty good to me because I like pastry stuff, honey-flavored flakes or whatever it was. Sounds pretty good. I would eat that. And I like quail too. But after 40 years, even that may have started to be getting old to them. I don't know. But think, if you will, you're one of these, just a regular children of Israel, and you're standing here at the banks of the Jordan, and for your whole life, you've been taught about your purpose, why you're in the wilderness, what the goal is. There's this promised land that God has prepared for you, and that's what you're doing. That's why you get up every day, is to do that. And here you are standing at the banks of this river, and you can look across it, and there it is, okay? Think about that. You think that's an exciting day? You're no longer going to be in this wilderness. You're going to be in a land of milk and honey. That's where they were. An exciting time. And on top of that, maybe you're just standing there, and I want you to really put yourself there, okay? Take yourself there. You're standing there trying to figure out, well, I've heard about, maybe I wasn't around, but, I heard that God parted the Red Sea one time, and maybe he's going to do that now. Or maybe you were there, and you remembered this happening and walking across and seeing Pharaoh's army washed away. So maybe you're thinking, maybe God's going to do something like that. And about that time, you see the priests walking down to the water, and they walk straight into the water, and they don't walk just to where it's ankle deep or knee deep or whatever. They walk straight out into the middle of this mile-wide river with raging water, and it's deep. And it doesn't really say in the Bible how it happened, and I can only imagine that, and it would make sense to me that maybe as soon as the last priest's foot went into the water started parting. And maybe the water's just divided right in between them. I don't know. I'm speculating, but to me that would make sense. And so you watch this happen. Maybe you weren't there for the Red Sea. This is blowing your mind, okay? This is all in the same day, and you're just this regular Israelite. And if that's not enough, you look, and there are 40,000. I don't know, Tad, you ever seen 40,000 soldiers in one place? I haven't either. I mean, 40,000 men, and it doesn't say that they're like just moving equipment around. It says they're armed for battle. That means that they had swords, spears, shields, bow and arrow, whatever instrument of war they had. That was all going in front of you. They were ready to face whatever was waiting on them on the other side of this river. That alone would be impressive to me, seeing 40,000 soldiers ready to go into war. So you're seeing that. And about this time, you're given the order to pick up everything you have and to cross this river. Well, to me, I know me, I would get about halfway there, and I'd be like, I wonder how much time I have to get across, because I remember what happened to Pharaoh, and I saw that, or my mom told me what happened to them. I don't want to be in this thing, not to mention the fact you're walking along, and there's these huge walls of water on each side of you, and you're on dry land. You walk right past the priest in the covenant, and then you're on your way. And it says that they moved with haste. So they had to get this whole nation across this river. And so finally, you set foot in the promised land. Got to be an amazing feeling. And I don't know about you, but they probably had to turn around one last time just to take a look of what they just did, what was behind them. And about this time, the priests, they see them coming out of the river carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And when the last priest's foot, it says in the Bible, when he stepped on the land of Canaan, what happened to the waters? They came back together. And I don't know, I've never seen a river parted. I don't know about y'all, but I would think that something this massive coming together is not going to be just like a wave in the pool or in the bathtub. This is going to be a huge event when this water comes back together, something else that you would have to remember. So my point here to doing this silly game of pretending like you're one of them, can you think of one thing you would want to build a monument about here? I mean, we build monuments to basketball coaches and football coaches and people for winning the most games or whatever. We find sillier things to build a statue for nowadays. But these people had a lot of reasons why they would want to remember this, and they would want their children to remember this going forward. Not to mention the fact that God commanded them to build this monument. Anybody got any comments about that?
That was something that was impossible for them alone, so they learn because they're about to embark on a couple of years of impossibilities. You know, without God's help, they couldn't have done any of it.
That's right. Really, the battle just started when they crossed. It was set up for them. It was there but they had to take it. But they couldn't get there without God's help. That's right.
And that was something that Moses told the children of Israel back in Deuteronomy. You need to tell your children where you came from.
Yeah.
They knew the story of the Israelites. They knew that they had crossed over the Red Sea. And I don't think when they got to the Jordan River, not one of them ever said, how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
You know, there's no way we're going to get across this. They already knew because their parents had told them, this is how we did this.
Yeah.
We walked up to the Red Sea and it just parted.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry. You're going to get across. You're going to the promised land.
Yeah.
So I think they had all the confidence in the world.
Yeah.
When they got to the edge of the Jordan River, there's nothing going to stop us because God is leading us.
That's right.
God is going to make sure we get across this Jordan River and we get over to the other side. We don't have any problem.
Exactly. And I think because of that, when I think even if God hadn't commanded them, somebody would have built an altar or something. That's just what they did back then. There's no way.
You
Yeah.
go back 2 weeks ago, we read in service Rahab.
Mm-hmm.
We read in James about Rahab. And that was in the 2nd chapter of Joshua. Excuse me.
Yeah.
That was 2,000 years later, and James was still talking about it. That shows how the kids were being taught.
That's right.
That's how we ought to teach our kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we tell our kids something, and they don't remember from 1 week to the next. These kids remember thousands of years later.
Yeah.
To where James was actually writing it in his book. Thousands of years later about Rahab, something had happened, before the children of Israel ever crossed the Jordan River.
Exactly.
That's the way we ought to educate our children.
Yeah. Thank you. That's exactly right. And and that goes along with the next thing I'm going to say. God gave them specific instructions when they how they were to go about this whole crossing of the Jordan. Again, my wife reminded me of something else that somebody turn real quick, if you will, to Exodus chapter 12 and read verses 1 through 3 for me. I told her I wouldn't say that. She told me she was going to be mad, but I couldn't help it. It was her idea. I had to. Otherwise, I'd be plagiarizing. So, yep.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, this month shall be your beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th of this month, every man shall take for himself a lamb according to the house of his father, a lamb for a household.
Okay, let me ask you a question. What I want to pull out of this is it was the 10th day of the first month, right? What day did they cross the Jordan? 10th day of the first month. Blew my mind when she pointed that out to me because it's not. I don't think that it was by accident that it happened on that day. I think that what Johnny just read to us was talking about the Passover, the very first Passover, when they were instructed to put the blood of this lamb. They were to choose a lamb, each family, and on the 10th day of the first month, so that the angel of death would pass over their house. On the 10th day of the first month, a representative from each tribe of Israel had to select a stone, not a little rock that they could just put in their pocket and carry across with them, or a handful of sand they could put in a bag, not from the edge of the water. It says they had to go to the midst of the river, right where the priests were standing, and select the stone. To me, that's significant. I think God wants them to remember the Passover day. This is something He wants them to burn into their memory and to pass on to their children. This passing and the connection of this passing across the Jordan and the Passover. That's what I feel like is going on there. I just would find it hard to believe it's an accident that they passed over on the same day of the same month. No, exactly. This was intentional. Okay. And then just briefly here, he instructed the priest exactly what to do. Not to go stand where it's safe and they wouldn't have to worry about drowning ankle deep. No, they walked straight out into the middle of the water with the Ark of the Covenant. What about these stones? I mean, how do we know that these were not just a rock? These are, yeah, they had to put these stones on their shoulders and carry them across. Okay, I don't know about you, but if I'm carrying a bag of fertilizer or seed, I mean, eventually it's going to end up on my shoulder because it's just easier to carry that weight instead of trying to carry it out in front of you or whatever. So these stones were meant to be big enough that they would stand out, that people would see them and they would be able to remember what happened there. All right. And then finally, God commanded them to erect this memorial on where they camped and when they got over on the Jericho side of the Jordan.
And these people had never been in battle before, had they? Because they were submissive to the
Egyptians.
Egyptians.
Yeah.
So this was going to be something all new for them, that they were going to have to face these battles.
Especially given the fact that most of them probably weren't even alive when they came out of
You
Egypt.
said that whole generation died
Yeah.
in the desert. So the only memories they would have had of what happened at the Red Sea would have been whatever their parents told them.
Exactly.
But didn't they have some battles before they got
Did they have battles in the
Oh boy.
wilderness?
See, that's the problem. I don't know. They may have. I'd have to. They did? Okay. Okay.
They did. 2.5 tribes stayed on this side of the river because they took that land and just passed.
Okay.
Had they ever had a battle prior to this?
But God talked about it. That was the deal. They didn't have to. He said, stand there and watch this. So,
Yeah, okay. Well, good. Thank you. See, man, I love being in this class.
You're welcome.
So, my time is getting short, but I'm almost ready to put a nice bow on this for y'all. But it's kind of, sort of in conclusion, but not really in conclusion, because I got a few thoughts here. But let's just talk real briefly. What is a stone made of? I guess if it's, you could say, well, Jason, is if it's a limestone that's made of lime, if it's a sandstone that's made out of sand, and there's probably all kind of stones that I don't know about. I'm not a geologist, but essentially, I know if I go back to 3rd, 4th grade science, I remember that my teacher taught me that stones are made up of minerals or mineraloids that have this affinity for each other. They somehow come together, and then through heat and through extreme pressure and over time, they form what we see as a stone. And then also some stones, they come from the center of the earth, this liquid lava, like it's called magma, that makes up the core of the earth. As it finds its way to the surface of the earth and cools off, then what's left is a stone. And if we're going to be living stones, if we're going to be Christians like this, then we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to be made of? What are we made of? Okay, because we're going to go through time. We're going to have pressure on us. We're going to be in heated situations, if you will, just using those same ideas. But what is it that makes up the stone that we are to be? And I think it is the teachings that we get from God. I think it is trying to take on the nature of God and certainly the very Spirit of God. And if you look in Colossians chapter 3, verse 12, and I'll just read this. It reminds us that we are God's chosen ones. And as living stones, we should reflect His very nature. And Colossians 3:12 will give us a little bit idea what that is. It says that we are to be holy, compassionate, kind, humble, meek, and I'm going to add to that a little bit, meek but not weak, okay? Strong. We should be strong. We should be patient. We should be forgiving. And I think that means we should forgive others, and we should be willing and able to forgive ourselves. And then finally, we should above all, have love and strive to live in harmony with others. And if we are living stones for God and we're made up of these things, that makes our jobs as Christians easier. What is our job? What is it called? What is the job that we have? It's called the what? The Great Commission, right? We are to go out and spread the gospel. And if we are living stones and we're comprised of all these characteristics we just listed, it's going to make people want to hear what we have to say. It's going to make people look at us and say, I want what they have. And that's, to me, is the essence of being a living stone for God. And I have just a couple minutes. I just want to, and I want to share this because I think this is, and I'm really setting up Jeff and Justin if Justin is listening, he can take this. Maybe you could do another whole class on living stone. But I think this is a great example of a living stone. And it comes from the story of the boy David, one of my favorite characters in the Bible, and probably some of y'all's too. But this young boy David, through the providence of God, was able to defeat this 9-foot tall behemoth of a war machine, killing machine that we know as Goliath, this Philistine giant, that no man, no soldier, no trained soldier in the army of Israel was willing to fight. They didn't want to face him on the battlefield because he was going to kill them. And I think this bothered David a little bit because his brothers were part of that army. But I think what really got under David's skin is when this giant would come down. I believe it's for 40 straight days, right? He came out on the battlefield and he mocked Israel. But what really got David is he mocked his God, okay? And David, we know, even as a young boy, he was a child of God. God loved him. He loved God. So David was able to take this dead stone, if you will, and he gave it purpose. He inserted life into this stone. He went to this brook, and he drove how many? 3 stones? 5 stones? 5 stones, and they were all smooth stones, and he wanted them to be smooth because he wanted these things to fly through the air. He knew exactly what he was going to be doing, and I think that Terry's even talked. He probably had a lot of time out there watching those sheep to get really good with this sling, okay? But he reached in there and he picked up these stones, and he only needed one because God was on his side. And he gave this stone life. He gave it purpose because he put it to work for God. See, this stone, up until the time David picked it up out of that water, it's serving no purpose. It had been sitting there for who knows how long. Long enough that the water had ran over it long enough to make it smooth. And he picked it up and he took that dead stone and he put it to work for God. And he slayed Goliath. And can you imagine? You ever watched a football game or a basketball game or something, and one team is just beating the daylights out of the other team, and all of a sudden something happens, and the commentators, when the first thing they say is, "What changed?" The momentum shifted, right? Oh my goodness, the momentum's now on whoever's side, and they come back and they win. Well, can you imagine the momentum that changed on the battlefield when Goliath fell? Can you imagine the air? You can almost hear it coming out of the Philistine army, and all of a sudden the Israelites were ready to go to war. So imagine, in closing, if we want to live our lives as living stones, we've got to go to work, and we can't be this stone that makes up a wall and we just kind of are seen at church every day, every Sunday, every Wednesday. But we have to go to work. We have to inject life into ourselves and go to work for God, and know that whatever we do, we don't have to go out there and bring 10,000 people into church or 10 people. If we bring one person, or if we talk to one person about the gospel, then I think we're doing our part as living stones. And I just want to thank y'all for letting me come in and take over for Justin today. And thank y'all for your participation and your interest. Y'all have a great worship service.